Hello, my name is Aubrey. I'm so glad you're here. Today I've made a list of 10 favorite books that I wish I could wipe my memory and read again for the first time, and 4 books that I don't wish to wipe my memory for. Let me explain. So when I was thinking about this prompt, I was like, oh, this will just be a fun excuse to talk about some of my very favorite books over the years. However, I started taking it a little bit too seriously. I ended up having 4 extra books that are favorites of mine, but I would absolutely under no circumstances erase my experience of reading them. And so I just thought it might be fun to include those as well, and I could talk about why I wouldn't want to read them again for the first time. But anyway, let's just get started. So the first book that I wish I could read again for the first time is A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. I thought this was so utterly fantastic. This is a delicious Dracula retelling, but it's told from the point of view of one of his vampire brides. Constanta was a medieval peasant who Dracula turned into an eternal vampire. It's all about the truly toxic and intoxicating relationship that she has with Dracula. It's quite short and I don't want to talk about it any further. I think if it sounds interesting to you, you should go in knowing no more than that. I really didn't know anything more than that going into this, and I'm glad because it was just a really fun book to unravel, if that makes any sense. If you want a book that is dark and sensual and deliciously written, but is also very memorable and impactful, I highly recommend A Dowry of Blood. And if you haven't read it yet, I'm very jealous because I wish I could read it again for the first time. Next, I have just one of my favorite YA books of all time. It's Carry On by Rainbow Rowell. I've read this book twice now, and it just remains to be a favorite. I love this book. I love these boys. Carry On is a quirky Harry Potter satire. We're following Simon Snow, the chosen one, as he slowly falls in love with his mortal enemy. It's just truly wonderful. Like, I love this book. I love the trilogy. It lives rent-free in my mind, it lives rent-free in my heart, and I do kind of wish that I could re-experience it for the first time ever, because I know I would love it just as much now as I did when I first read it. Okay, next I have a book that I would not want to wipe from my memory, and that is the Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy by Laini Taylor, not just this first one, but the whole trilogy. This is a longtime favorite of mine. I read this trilogy way before BookTube. This is a urban fantasy that turns into a high fantasy. It has a kind of forbidden Romeo and Juliet romance. The funny thing about this series, and the reason why I wouldn't want to read it again for the first time, is that this is one of those series that has sort of aged like a fine wine. Like, it's just gotten better over time how much I have thought about it and ruminated on it. Because honestly, when I read it at the time, I was definitely enjoying it. I wouldn't say that I didn't like it, but I did have very conflicted feelings about it, and one of those things is that, like I said, the beginning of the book is kind of urban fantasy leaning. There is this weird kind of mystery that's set up. We're following our main character, Carew, who is an art student at this college, but in her time off, she's like breaking into museums and stealing teeth. She's stealing teeth from animals, also humans, I think, you know, like long dead ancient humans. So it sets up this very interesting mystery at the beginning, and this kind of urban fantasy thing that then turns into a high fantasy. I never quite got over what I felt like I had been promised with the first half of this book, and so when we took that turn into a high fantasy, I was like, well, wait, but like I really wanted what I thought the book was going to be. As I was reading, I sort of couldn't look past that. Since then, I have thought about this series so often. I've thought about the characters and certain impactful moments. I've just grown to love it over time, and I would be afraid you know, to wipe my memory clean and start over again, because I don't know how I would feel about it. I do really need to reread this soon, so that in itself might be kind of like reading it again for the first time because it's been so long, but I certainly wouldn't want to erase, you know, the feelings that I've cultivated for it over the years. Next, I have kind of a weird one, but just hear me out. It's On Writing by Stephen King. This was my very first Stephen King book, and it remains to be my favorite Stephen King book. It is mostly a memoir about his life, his early childhood, developing a love for writing, getting his first book deal, dealing with addiction. It covers quite a lot of his life. At the very end, there's a little bit of writing advice. Before reading this, I thought I had absolutely no interest in reading Stephen King. This book single-handedly made me fall in love with him, just like as a person, as an author, as a writer. I just think he's a fascinating guy. This is kind of an in-between one where it's like, on one level, I do wish I could read it again for the first time and just experience that joy and inspiration. Like, I felt so inspired and motivated after reading this, but also now I have read you know, a decent amount of King. I don't know if it would have had that same kind of mind-blowing aspect that it did the first time, because it was like, not only is this a good memoir and it's just about an interesting person, but it's about someone that I'd kind of written off as just having no interest in, and it changed my mind, right? And so that being a somewhat like mind-blowing experience. Truly, this is such a good book. If you are a Stephen King fan, if you are interested in writing or even just kind of creativity at all, I would highly, highly recommend this book. The next book I wish I could read again for the first time is The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. I've read Stardust, American Gods, Coraline, and I feel like I've read another one, but I can't think of it. But this one is still my favorite. I just think The Graveyard Book is so cozy and sweet and whimsical. We're following a boy who is raised in a graveyard. His parents were murdered by a serial killer, and he, as a baby, manages to get away, and then the ghosts in this graveyard decide to raise him. The boy eventually grows up, he gets into graveyard shenanigans, and it's just so wholesome. It's just a fun, charming time. I really loved this, and I wish that I could read it for the first time all over again. Alright, the next book I wish I could read again for the first time is Down Among the Sticks and Bones by Shauna Maguire. This is book 2 in the Wayward Children series. I, to some degree, wish that I could read the whole series again for the first time, but if I could only pick one to reread, it would be this one. It's dark and weird. This is the book that really made me fall in love with the series to begin with. I think I gave book 1 like 3 stars, and I gave this one 5 stars. Just absolutely fantastic. The Wayward Children series is a series of novellas about children who step through magical doorways and find amazing places. Most of these places, at least the ones that we've explored, tend to have a little bit of darkness to them. Some of them have a lot of darkness to them, and this world had a lot of darkness in it, and I loved it. I ate it up. Down Among the Sticks and Bones, I wish I could read you for the first time again. Okay, another favorite book that I would not want to read for the first time again is The Last Tale of the Flower Bride by Roshani Chokshi. I read this very recently. I absolutely loved it. It just totally won me over. It is the mystery behind 2 childhood best friends, one of whom goes missing, and nobody knows what happened to her. We're following the perspective of one of the girl's husband after she's grown up, and then we're also following the perspective of the girl who disappeared in her childhood. Oh, it is just so good. Like, chef's kiss, 5 out of 5 stars. I'm obsessed with this book, and the reason why I wouldn't want to read it again for the first time is because it's just gonna get better with time. It's gonna get better the more I think about it and return to it and, you know, ruminate over it. And so I definitely wouldn't want to deprive myself of that experience. So yeah, The Last Tale of the Flower Bride, a favorite book, definitely, but not one I would want to read again for the first time. A book and series that I would want to read again for the first time, though, is Heartstopper by Alice Oseman. Heartstopper is just so special. Like, I truly don't have the words for how special Heartstopper is. The charm, the wholesome sweetness of Heartstopper, the representation of Heartstopper. It's just so wonderfully good in its utter simplicity. And I don't know how else to explain it. It's about two boys falling in love. That's it. That's the whole story. There's like very little else to it. There's not a lot of drama. There's not a lot of melodrama. It's just simple. It's sweet. I wish that I had had this when I was younger. I think it would have helped me a lot in figuring myself out, but I'm so glad that young people have Heartstopper and have just in general so much more LGBT plus representation. So yeah, I think Heartstopper is wonderful and important, and I wish I could read it again for the first time because I know I would love it just as much now as I did the first time. Another book I wish I could read again for the first time is Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. I read this only last year, but even still, I loved it so much. It just had so many of my favorite things: whimsy, humor, found family. I think specifically I loved falling in love with it as I was reading it because it started off and I liked it, and you know, it was making me laugh and I found it very charming, and it was like through the story that I just fell in love with it more and more. Yeah, I would love to experience that again. You know, you can only do that once. If you like The Princess Bride or A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy or kind of quirky books like that, you will love this, I promise. Next, I have An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir. This is a Roman Empire inspired fantasy world. We're following our main character Leia as she tries to like infiltrate and spy on this military school because the rebels that need this information might be able to help her save her brother. And so she goes in as a slave trying to uncover information. And then we're also following one of the soldiers at the school who really doesn't want to be a part of what they're doing. I just remember feeling very hooked by it. I couldn't stop reading. I found it very fast-paced and I was enjoying the slow burn romance. I really liked the characters and the stakes were very high, so you know, it created a lot of urgency. I just really liked this one and I wish I could experience it for the first time again. Okay, another favorite book that I would not want to read again for the first time is The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater, and specifically like the whole Raven cycle. I adore this series. I absolutely fell in love with it when I read it. However, it took me a few tries to actually get into this book, which is the biggest reason why I wouldn't want to risk erasing my memory to read it again for the first time, because I believe I tried reading this like 2 or 3 times and DNFing it each time before finally pushing through and falling in love. It hit me at the right time. I was really in the mood for it, and I'm pretty sure I binge read the series in like the span of a week. I just fell in love with the characters and the humor and the writing style. I love this series so much, so dearly. This is another one that I return to in my head frequently. I'm thinking about these characters and wondering how they are. I would keep my experience with this series exactly the same. A book that I would want to read again for the first time is Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. This was another pretty recent read. I read this at the tail end of last year. But this book is actually what inspired this video to begin with, because when I did my recent review of this duology, I said in that video that this is the kind of book I wish I could wipe from my memory so that I could read it for the first time all over again. So, of course, I had to include it. This is a wonderfully charming book about 2 budding columnists, Iris and Roman, who are rivals at the same paper and they're trying to get the same promotion, and then they end up exchanging anonymous letters through a pair of magical typewriters and falling in love. It is truly so sweet and swoon-worthy and charming, and I love Divine Rivals. You can watch my review if you want to see more thoughts on it, but yeah, this was a 5-star for me. I wish I could read it again for the first time. Absolutely fantastic. Next, I have a very heavy book. It is Lock and Key by Joe Hill. This is a big bind-up of all the graphic novels. This series is unbelievably good. It is unbelievably good. Now, this is not for everyone. It's a horror series. It is quite gruesome and disturbing and gross at times, so read with caution. But if you can handle that, The story here, the characters, it's magnificent, truly. It's so good. The way the story is constructed, the weaving of the threads, it just works beautifully. It's about a family whose life gets completely shaken up when their father is like brutally murdered by one of his students. They all decide to relocate to this old family house called Key House. After spending some time there, the kids start discovering these like magical keys that do all sorts of stuff. Some of them are kind of fun and whimsical, and some of them are creepy and gross. Turns out there's this dark entity that wants these keys. It becomes this, you know, this mystery. Who is this entity and what do they want with these keys and where did this thing come from? And, you know, what do all these keys do? Meanwhile, we still have to like be normal kids and like go to school. I don't think I'm doing it any justice. Trust me when I say that it is an excellent series, just like top notch, so good. Again, not for everyone, not for everyone. Look up trigger warnings, but if it sounds good to you, I mean, give it a try, please. It is leagues better than the Netflix show. Like, leagues better. The Netflix show is insulting, okay? The source material is so much better. Alright, and a book that I would not want to read again for the first time is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. This is my favorite book of all time. The reason I love this and the reason I pick this as my favorite book of all time is because it is very quintessential to who I am. I think it shaped me quite a lot in my youth in terms of the kinds of stories that I like. I love whimsy, and I have a feeling that I love whimsy because I love Alice in Wonderland. I mean, I guess that's kind of a chicken or egg situation, but regardless, I would never ever ever want to erase my memory and read this for the first time because part of what I love about it is my history with it. I am dyslexic and I have ADHD. I feel like I've talked about this a lot on my channel, but I couldn't learn to read, and the only thing that I wanted in life was to learn how to read. And one of the best things that my parents did for me was that we would sit down and my dad would read out loud to me, and we read all kinds of books out loud. Harry Potter, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, A Wrinkle in Time. We read a lot of Shel Silverstein poems, and we also read Alice in Wonderland, both Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. I just treasure these books. I love them so much. I love the whimsy. I love the memorable characters. I find Alice in Wonderland to just be such a wonderfully imaginative, whimsical story, but I also find it very poignant at times, and I think there is some very interesting commentary here about what it's like to be a little girl in a world that just doesn't value and doesn't care what they have to say. The whole story of Alice in Wonderland is a little girl walking around from place to place and being told that she doesn't know what she's talking about by everyone that she comes across. It's Alice walking around being like, hey, I know stuff, and like, I know how things work, and this is not how anything works. And everyone else just sort of rolling their eyes and being like, ugh, you don't know anything, child. I think there's a lot more depth to Alice in Wonderland than people give it credit for, but that's a video for another day, I think. So anyway, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. What are some of your favorite books that you wish you could read again for the first time? I had so much fun making this list and picking out these books, so, you know, feel free to like really type out a long list if you want. This was such an interesting thing to think about, at least for me. If you wanted to see my Divine Rivals review, I will leave that right here. Thank you so much for watching. Please like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you want to see more from me. I hope to see you next time. Bye!